very good afternoon to one and all who have joined us today. Our honorable guest, Shri C.S. Vaidyanathan, Dr. Seema Singh, Faculty Convener of Debate and Discussion Society, Campus Law Center, respected faculty members, guests, students, and all the viewers and audience. A very warm welcome to the second session of Courtroom Legends Keynote Series. I'm Kajal Sonkar, a final year student of Campus Law Center and currently serving as the student convener of Debate and Discussion Society, along with a fellow batchmate of mine, Mr. Vijay Pujari. On behalf of Campus Law Center and Debate and Discussion Society, I thank you all, and foremostly our honorable guest, Mr. Vaidyanathan, for joining us today. Courtroom Legends Keynote Series, an initiative by Debate and Discussion Society. This series is an experiment to get into the minds of stalwarts of legal field who dedicated their lifetime to it. While they address us students at this platform of Campus Law Center, they are not just source of knowledge for us, they are the shining examples of possibility. They are everything we hope to be one day. In the second session of the series, we have none other than Mr. Vaidyanathan speaking on a very pertinent topic of our times, equal opportunity and meritocracy. Shri Vaidyanathan, Senior Advocate, former Additional Solicitor General of India, famously known as God's Counsel, the Counsel for Ram Lalla Virajman, needs no introduction. But I'll take this opportunity as an indulgence and introduce this courtroom legend. Mr. Vaidyanathan successfully argued to receive the first ever compensation in habeas corpus petition in Sebastian Hongre versus Union of India. Sir argued in the case of Mithu Singh versus State of Punjab, the case which effectively led to the abolition of mandatory death penalty. Sir is currently representing State of Tamil Nadu in reservation and super speciality courses matter, United Breweries in Vijay Mallya Kingfisher matter, and Hansa Research Group in TRP scam case. We are honored to have the champion of writs, the lawyer who is well known for his pro bono work, Shri C.S. Vaidyanathan. We again welcome you, sir. Thank you for gracing us with your esteemed presence. Before I open the floor to sir, I would like to request Dr. Seema Singh to please address us with her welcome remarks.
Thank you so much, Kajal. It's truly a privilege for all of us that we have got this opportunity to listen Mr. Vaidyanathan. And I welcome Vaidyanathan, sir, and I extend my gratitude on the behalf of Campus Law Center and entire law faculty for accepting our invite to deliver a keynote address over a very relevant topic, equal opportunity and meritocracy. Equal opportunity has been discussed a lot, but we have seen very less discussion over the topic of meritocracy. So I know it is going to be a very interesting lecture. And I know that everybody is so anxiously waiting for your address. So without taking much time, I invite you to deliver your keynote address. The floor is yours, sir. I welcome you once again. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, Dr. Seema Singh, Kajal Sonkar, and Vijay Pujari, and my young friends. I'm very glad to be with all my young friends in the law faculty, Campus Law Center. My son and daughter passed through Campus Law Center, so I have an association with the Campus Law Center. Campus Law Center in University of Delhi has had some of the finest jurists and academics. My good friend Parag Tripathi father was the dean, Dr. P.K. Tripathi. Dr. Madhav Menon has been here, Professor Upendra Bakshi, so many of them, so many in the past, deans. And it has a number of distinguished alumni amongst the sitting Supreme Court judges, amongst the past judges, amongst the High Court judges, Chief Justices, so many of them, and amongst the academics also. And I think in the last almost 100 years, the university and the Campus Law Center has made a very, very significant contribution to law and judiciary in the country. There are people who are not only leaders in the profession, but also in public life who have come out of the Campus Law Center. Therefore, that's a very creditable achievement, and you have a big task to match up to the past and excel in future also. Equal opportunity and meritocracy, it is a very, very volatile subject. It's more than sensitive, it is a volatile subject. It evokes a very strong reaction, evokes the cards and touches the sensitivities of the large and diverse sections of the people. Civilization, as we know, grew from small habitation on the riverbanks, from an agrarian society, small peasant communities, self-sustained, self-sufficient communities. This was the start of the civilization, from nomadic life to settlements. But over centuries, we became a strongly agricultural oriented society. Our economy was mainly based on the farming. In the process, in the mid life career of the country, we had feudal landlords who were running and the employees. The Industrial Revolution with steam engine and all these motors that came in, that gave rise to a different kind of life. Urbanization started, increase in inequality. And it is from that point that I'm touching on it. During the period of the Industrial Revolution, significant increase in inequality amongst diverse sections of the people. We have now moved on to the post-industrial society, as it were, which is based more on information and services. So it's shift from products to ideas and knowledge. It's moved on from hands-on skill to literacy skills. From urbanization, we are now going to urbanization, more suburban areas. These throw up a number of new challenges. Suddenly, a whole host of skilled people have become jobless, they have become homeless, they have become redundant, unemployed, and to some extent unemployable. These are the new challenges that have come up. We have seen this has resulted in political upheavals. We had the Brexit in England. We had Trumpism in the US. We see changes in India. In the field of economy, we are seeing the business moving from the rich business families to information tech czars. And you have the unicorns, the new entrepreneurs, the successful billion-dollar startups, the unicorns. You have the oligopolies and the monopolies of in the technological and information field, like Apple, Microsoft, Alphabet, parent company of Google, Tesla, Amazon, all these companies. And in India, you had, starting from Infosys, Wipro, HCL, you have the Jio platform, you have a whole set of new companies. Now, these calls for new skills and out-of-the-box thinking, new vision, new paradigm. Government jobs are shrinking. One of the biggest problems which we have faced in regard to providing equal opportunities, at least so far as the court is concerned, is in respect of providing equal opportunity, mainly in respect of government and public sector employment. And today, there is shrinking of jobs in the public sector and the government sector. Public sector is being privatized, and government is talking of less government, smaller government, better governance, but smaller government. Therefore, the jobs are vanishing or going down. Professions are changing. Opportunity is changing. So equal opportunity to learn new skills are needed, new avenues for employment, which is more in respect of self-employment, becoming an entrepreneur, etc. If you talk of government jobs, you find that for 100 jobs, there will be 100,000 people who are applying. The opportunities are limited. There is a huge demand, but the goods available are less. Equally, in respect of some of the professional institutions, medical colleges, particularly postgraduate medical education, we still have a shortage. We had it in engineering, we had it in management education, we have it to some extent even in law, though I joined law at a time when I could get admission for the asking. But over time, competitive examination came in even in respect of legal education, and you are all the bright young students going through this drill. We see huge demand even in respect of good nursery schools. That is where we have reached now. Therefore, there is a mismatch between the demand and supply. How do we reconcile? One, of course, is to increase the availability of goods, which is what happened in engineering management education. Therefore, the seats went up begging. That will happen over time, even in respect of medical colleges. Government wants to have one medical college in each district. It might happen. Similarly, you have an abundance of law colleges. In fact, some of the law colleges may have to be shut down. That's the kind of situation we are reaching. We have huge diversities in the world and in these countries. Caste, class, race, geographies, religion, gender, language, place of birth, domicile, all these, there are various differences which give rise to different genetic and environmental differences in which people grow up. The lived realities are different, experiences are different. Diverse home environment. How do you have a common assessment of persons born with different background in different situations, brought up differently? How do you assess the merit of the different kind of people? That's one important aspect that has to be considered. Second, we have to, in a democracy, make available equal opportunity for power, position to people from diverse backgrounds. You can't have judges coming only from a particular background. You need people from the farmer's background, from persons who have lived in the rural areas, who have gone through the difficult times. You need them in public services, leadership, in judiciary. You need them Similarly, in respect of civil servants, even doctors. So when you say assess on all these persons with diverse backgrounds for different kinds of jobs, occupations, or opportunities, can there be any uniform yardstick? What is merit? How do you determine merit? I want to quote what Justice Bhagwati said in Pradeep Jain's case, 1984. Merit, what in terms considering what is merit, he said, intelligent, incisive mind, sound knowledge, capacity for hard work. In addition, he said there is a need for a sense of social commitment and dedication to the cause of poor. So do marks determine merit? How do you measure human sympathies and commitment to serve, as Justice Krishna had said, Daridra Narayana? Because public service is intended for them also. You have to reach the goods and services to them. If you have to measure the heart and head to assess the relative value, how do you measure the unequals, people from diverse backgrounds with identical standards? This is a crucial thing because this was recognized in the 70s and 80s by the Supreme Court. But for some reason, after TMA Pai, though TMA Pai didn't say that, a kind of uniform examination to assess merit for persons of all kinds from diverse backgrounds has been adopted. NEET, JEE, CLAT, all these. We need to see whether that is consistent with what the Constitution requires. That's one. Second, what is equality and what is equality of opportunity? Within a year of founding of the Republic, we had two important cases coming from Madras, then Madras Presidency, Champakam Durarajan and Venkataraman. One was in regard to admission to educational institutions, engineering and medicine. The second was in regard to admission to employment. 16.4 was there, 15.4 was not there at that time. I'm talking about before the First Amendment. First Amendment introduced 15.4 corresponding to 16.4. So therefore, the court said that the communal geo, which reserved based on Brahmins, non-Brahmins, backward classes, Muslims, other religions, Anglo-Indians, etc. In respect of educational institutions, it was completely struck down. In respect of employment, it was saved to the extent of reservation for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and backward classes. This was 1951. Then the First Amendment came in. Chief Justice S.R. Das pronounced the judgment. Then the second occasion which arose in the very first decade was when reservation based on place of birth or domicile for educational institution arose in D.P. Joshi case. Justice Venkataraman upheld the reservation based on that and said local people may be needed to serve the needs of the local areas. So therefore, it was upheld on the ground of good classification. Then came Balaji, which is today treated as laying down the upper limit for reservation of 50%. When you say reservation, it cannot be the big chunk Therefore, it has to be half or less than that. So that was again an approach based on treating reservation as a kind of exception to the general rule of equality. I don't know whether today that can stand the test, although this rule of 50% to a large extent has been upheld. Subsequently in Indrasani, it's being argued today before a bench of Constitution bench, the 103rd Amendment, whether therefore that takes away the very basis on which Balaji or Indrasani was pronounced. In any case, the basis, therefore, that it is an exception is no longer true, because equality necessarily contemplates enabling equal opportunity, therefore, to that extent, providing even the step up. Therefore, that's what was said. That is why, when we come to Devadasan, the very next year, though Subbarao was in the minority, I would say that the majority speaking through Mudolkar was completely against the idea, because Mudolkar also said reservation is to provide equal opportunity. This is what the majority said. But Subbarao, what he said is very instructive. I want to read that part of it. It's Article 16 is an application of general rule. It says that there shall be equality of opportunity for all citizens. If it stood alone, all backward communities would go to the wall in a society of uneven basic social structure. The said rule of equality would remain only a utopian consumption unless a practical content was given to it. Its strict enforcement brings about the very situation it seeks to avoid. To make my point clear, take an illustration of a horse race. Two horses are set down to run a race. One is a first-class race horse and the other an ordinary one. Both are made to run from the same starting point, no handicaps given. Though theoretically they are given equal opportunity to run the race, in practice, the ordinary horse is not given an equal opportunity to compete with the racehorse. Indeed, that is denied to it. So a handicap may be given either in the nature of extra weight or a start from a longer distance. By doing so, what would otherwise have been a farce of a competition would be made a real one. This is what he said. And it's very important because this is subsequently taken up in most of the other judgments by the Supreme Court. In St. Xavier's, Justice Matthew, another person who had a great vision and was very, very well read, he and Justice Chandrachud, Justice Krishna Iyer, they had all come by that time. They referred to the Moynihan report, and they said equal opportunity is not merely a matter of legal equality, but depends not merely on absence of disabilities, but presence of ability. There can't be one law for lion and ox, because the court said that would be oppression. One law for lion and ox. Fair share in public life and economic activity must be given. That is what is contemplated. So promotion of common man's capabilities, overpowering environmental adversities and opening up full opportunity to develop. Therefore, to equalize, how do you assess merit? Because there are people born with certain environmental adversities. This is developed further in Thomas in 76. Formal equality is equality in law, but inequality in fact. And in Jagdish Saran, this was, Jagdish Saran was a bench of three honorable judges, Justice Krishna Iyer, Justice Pathak, and Justice Chinnappa Reddy, and they delivered Jagdish Saran in 80 and ABSK Sangh in 81. And what they said, equal opportunity genetically and environmentally to develop his potential, because persons are born, the accident of birth places them in different households with different economic circumstances, different upbringing. You don't have people who are all educated amongst the parents in respect of some. Therefore, these are all certain adversities that the student will have to face. So, but he must be given equal opportunity to develop his potential. So, therefore, in a very picturesque language, as Justice Krishna always used to do, he said equal opportunity to Bangi and the Brahmin, to Prince and the Pauper. Apply equalizing techniques to enlarge opportunities. Equality of opportunity must enable equality of results. Therefore, that's what he said, and he referred to John Rawls on distributive justice. Justice Bhagwati took off from there in Pradeep Jain, where for the first time some uniform criteria was evolved in regard to medical admission. And he said, concept of equality takes in its sweep every process of equalization and protective discrimination, not de jure, but de facto equality. Vasant Kumar, another very powerful constitution bench, Justice Chandrachud, Justice Venkatramaya, Justice Chinnapareddy, Justice Venkatramaya, I guess I mentioned that. Justice Desai, they were all there, Justice Fasalali. Now, this talked of concept of meritarian principle, conflict between meritarian principle and the compensatory principle. And I had the good fortune to argue this case also, and I had referred to the then a new book, Andre Bettel's Competing Inequalities, and they went into that, and also the general consensus was there is not enough fruit in the garden, and those who are in want to keep others out, like it happens in a railway compartment. Once you are in, you are reluctant to let others in. This was what was said. From there, we traveled to 1990, where Chief Justice Mukherjee, he talked of the dynamic concept of equality, covering every process of equalization, must become a living reality for large masses of peoples. And he again repeated, unequals cannot be treated by identical standard. Therefore, the test of 70, 80 continued at 90. Indira Sani, 9 judges, and some of the judges, there were a number of judgments, but I want to refer to Justice Sawant and Justice Jeevan Reddy. Equality postulates not merely legal equality, but real equality, not just a formal right or a vacuous declaration, but a positive right. And for assessing equality of opportunity, necessary to treat unequally situated persons unequally. Not doing so will perpetuate and accentuate inequality. Therefore, both in regard to equalization of opportunities and in regard to testing merit, he had this is what he said. And the other passage which I wanted to mention about Justice Jeevan Reddy, concept of equality contemplates minimizing inequalities in income, eliminating inequalities in status, facilities, and opportunities amongst individuals and groups. And Justice Sawant went to the extent of saying, if these are not given, the goals set out in the preamble of fraternity and dignity cannot be achieved. Then we come to TMA Pai, which is 11-judge bench. And Chief Justice Kripal said, meritorious candidates should not be unfairly treated by preferences to less meritorious but more influential applicants. Now, surely the persons who come from the backward classes, etc., cannot be treated in these influential applicants. Therefore, TMA Pi cannot be said to have laid down a law that merit will have to be tested uniformly, applying uniform standard, in spite of the difference in the diverse backgrounds of the students. This went through a process, Islamic Academy, then you had Saurabh Chandra, then Inam Das case, etc., where again the emphasis was on merit and excellence, assuming special significance. But Nagaraj again said that it is not formal equality. There has to be affirmative action. This, of course, was in the context of the employment opportunities. Then we come to Modern Dental College, 2016, Justice Sikri speaking mainly for the bench, which talked of a fair, transparent, and non-exploitative procedure for admission based on merit. Therefore, had they in any manner watered down what was said earlier in the 70s, 80s, and 90s in regard to having different methods of testing persons from diverse backgrounds? I would say no. In spite of it, you have an All India examination which tests persons on a single yardstick. It doesn't take into account persons who come from local languages being the medium of education. Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, etc. Therefore, they have a grievance. Persons who come from rural background. Persons who do not have the affluence to go into the factories which have now come up in Kota, Hyderabad, Delhi for training people for the purpose of this entrance examination. Now, are they on a level playing field? Are they being given a level playing field? This is one of the issues that I think the Supreme Court will have to take up, because today, again, the tide is turning. You have seen in the last 1 year, 2 years, the Pavitra II judgment of Justice Chandrachud, which talks of substantive equality rather than formal equality. You have seen the reference of Chinnaya to a larger bench, which Chinnaya said that you can't make sub-classification amongst the reserved categories, most backward, etc. But this was recognized actually in a sense in Indrasani when it said that creamy layer will have to be excluded. Therefore, to that extent, even in respect of scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, there are some communities, whether in scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, or backward classes, who have sort of monopolized the reservation. And there are other communities which have not had so many opportunities. Therefore, this is an aspect which requires consideration by the court. Now, these are some of the issues. When I sum up, I'll say the issues that are coming up now in courts are being heard. But one important thing that I want to mention, this is not just a problem in India. I was reading a book by Michael Sandel on the tyranny of merit. He has done an excellent analysis of the American situation. And he has analyzed the events leading up to Brexit and the Trump victory and subsequent events. And he says this kind of testing in regard to the merit, it has generated hubris amongst the winners and humiliation and resentment amongst the losers. He says these moral sentiments are at the heart of the popular uprising amongst the elites in the US and in the UK, which is what has seen persons who are not graduates, white non-graduates, and have been thrown out of employment on account of the various technological changes, plumping for Trump and Trumpism and against the Democrats. The conviction that the winners deserve the victory and the losers deserve their fate. Now, this has caused a lot of resentment, and that should not happen in our country. There are persons today who are fortunate with parents who take extra care of their education and sacrifice a lot of things in the family for that purpose. But not everybody is so favorably circumstanced. You have also the problem of helicopter parenting, extra attention devoted, coaching, these things take place. Therefore, there is today a criticism that meritocracy entrenches inequality. It is not ensuring equality and equal opportunity, but it entrenches inequality. Does it? That's one of the questions. Do examinations like SAT, JEE, NEET, do they track wealth? Are the more economically affluent able to succeed better? This again is a consideration which one will have to look at. Does diversity suffer? Now, today, these questions, some of them are being raised. The Maratha reservation, which is going on. Of course, 50% reservation when it was talked of in Balaji, it was more the vertical reservation, not the horizontal reservation, and therefore it is being said that after the 103rd Amendment, when economically backward classes have to be provided reservation, this can be done in a manner where it is horizontal. You have the problem of in-service candidate, persons coming from rural service. Now people are saying that you have doctors who are settled in urban areas, they are not willing to go to rural areas, and don't the rural people deserve health services? We need to provide equal opportunity to the physically challenged. In spite of several attempts, the proportion of women have not come up in the judiciary, in several other jobs. Perhaps it is improving in respect of education substantially. Now, these are some of the questions that will have to be considered, that are being considered, and whether creamy layer should apply. Cornering of benefit by some caste and the exclusion, therefore, or should it be restricted to one generation or two generations? That of course is a policy decision, but the court will certainly take into account how do you assess merit, or how do you equalize the opportunity. These are aspects which the court can certainly consider. I will steer clear of politics or policy issues because that is not a matter on which either you or I can discuss. That is a matter for the politicians, the persons in power to do that. But I think what is important is people coming from humble backgrounds, people coming with born with certain disabilities, economic, environmental, physical, etc., ought to be compensated, and so that equal opportunity is provided. And I think the court's attempt is today once again to restore the significant object contemplated not merely by the preamble but by the very concept of equality in Article 14. I would leave these thoughts, and I will now leave it open for discussion, and the whatever emerges out, let's see. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of everyone present here today, thank you for taking time out to deliver this thought-provoking keynote. I am Vijay Pujari, a final year law student of Campus Law Center and convener of Debate and Discussion Society. Today, I'll be moderating a brief Q&A session, sir. Before we go any further, we have few questions from our end, and once we are done with them, we'll open it to the floor. The first question, sir. In Indra Swani, the first 4 judges, including Justice Jeevan Reddy, held that normally the 50% breach will not be done, except in exceptional circumstances, essentially leaving a safety wall for the future reference. Sir, do you think it is time we relook at the Indra Swani? Is 50% rule really an impregnable fortress?
As I said, I think 50%, which was said in Balaji and which was again reiterated, but what it's important, I should point out, it's not merely the judgments. If you look at Article 16, when an amendment was made, 81st Amendment in 2000, in sub-article 4B of Article 16, it said, the Constitution Amendment said, as a separate clerk in any succeeding year, and such shall not be considered together with the vacancies of the year in which they are being filled up, for determining the ceiling of 50% reservation on total number of vacancies of that year. So the Constitution Amendment itself recognized a kind of ceiling. Now, this was the 81st Amendment. When thereafter, the 103rd Amendment was made last year, year before last. Now, this talks of an additional 10%, both under Article 15 and Article 16. Therefore, Article 15(6) and Article 16(6) talks of provision of reservation based on economically weaker criteria to providing reservation for economically weaker section. Therefore, in a sense, the Parliament accepted it, but they said for economically backward section, we will provide an additional one. Also, the horizontal reservation can be provided in respect of various categories, which won't exceed, therefore make the vertical reservation exceed the 50%. So amongst that, you can provide that. So today, in a sense, the Parliament has in mind 50 plus 10, 60. That perhaps is what it has in mind. In addition, whether what Justice Jeevan Reddy said, therefore, in exceptional circumstances, maybe, like for example, if you take some of the 6 schedule areas, I think you need to consider, if you have a medical college there, I think in a 6 schedule area, you should make a special provision for even 100% reservation. It should be possible. Therefore, I don't think we should treat this as a kind of a inflexible rule. That's what it is.
Yes, sir. If fraternity is the final destination of the nation, is reservation a rightful path to it?
Yeah. This again raises the same question. What do we mean by equality and equal opportunity? Therefore, we are not talking of formal equality or equality, de jure equality, but we are talking of real and substantive equality. Because it is only real and substantive equality which will ensure that there is fraternity amongst all. Therefore, the huge differences that we have today, look at what has happened. You have a few billionaires who are today virtually controlling the corporate houses in the world and in India. This huge difference will have to be bridged. Now, education, employment, of course, today we are moving into a world where it has to throw up more entrepreneurs. Even if it is small and medium enterprises, it has to throw up more entrepreneurs who will, therefore, you won't depend only on government jobs. But the real opportunity, equal opportunity will come in only when, therefore, you do not treat the racehorse and the ordinary horse alike. You have to, therefore, give that handicap. You have to give that additional strength to the persons who need it.
Sir, in that sense, do we, taking your reference of racehorse and a normal horse, does a normal horse stop getting the benefit once it attains the position of a racehorse?
See, this is a dilemma that we are facing. And when does, see, if you look at the original thinking of the framers of the Constitution, they wanted the reservation only for a limited period, which we have been extending from time to time. Therefore, the concept is that persons who have secured the benefit have therefore got that push for that equal opportunity, and therefore they should not continue to avail it. Therefore, from that perspective, I would think that if two generations have been able to get in to IAS or IFS through the reservation quota, or if two generations have been able to get access to the medical education, for them to continue to claim that would therefore may not be consistent with the principle of equal opportunity. One. Secondly, the creamy layer concept. Why was it evolved? So therefore, there are certain handicaps as a result of your background belonging to a community. But it doesn't mean for a Dalit, even if he is affluent, still that caste mark will remain. So you need that help. But perhaps over a period of time that today in urban areas, nobody perhaps considers it. In my time, nobody asked what caste I belong to. It was when I first came to Delhi in 1970s that people really started asking me what caste I belong to, because in the south, perhaps at least from the place which I came from, it was not considered so important. But here, I find that in UP and Bihar, there is so much of distinction which is made based on the caste, which was not really the case when I grew up.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, I have one of my colleagues, Mr. Chirag Dhaya, coming up with the next question. Chirag, you may go ahead.
Hi, good evening, sir.
Good evening.
According to a recent survey published in the Hindu, the newspaper, over 60% SC and OBC faculty positions are vacant in IIMs, and less than 1% of the professors in central universities are from the ST community. So, in light of the ever increasing problem of unemployment, as you mentioned, even amongst the skilled workforce, these staggering statistics beg the question whether reservation in our country truly contributes towards ensuring meritocracy.
Why is it that there are vacancies? We have this data. Is it because people are not available, or there has not been effort to fill in these vacancies? I find it difficult to believe. Now, I can speak about the legal profession. I can speak about the judiciary. I think we have to pay more attention to diversity in judiciary. We have very few persons from the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, from women, even amongst women, even though there are a number of women practicing, we don't have so many of them. So therefore, are we paying sufficient attention to people from diverse backgrounds to occupy these positions? I would think that there has to be a special effort to fill in these vacancies. If thereafter we are not able to find people, then of course you have to fill it in with others. And then, because you can't allow these vacancies to remain unfilled, because that will affect services, that will affect the whatever development work will have to go on. Therefore, from that perspective, I think there has to be a greater effort to fill in these vacancies.
Yes. Snigdha Sharma, a first year student of law, will be asking the next question. Snigdha, please.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
My question is, sir, as you said, the opportunities to develop merit are not distributed equally. It is this inadequacy the framers of the Constitution tried to address with the provisions of Article 16. So, sir, how much have we as a nation progressed over the years when it comes to bridging this divide, as still the demand for reservation is increasing?
I missed the last part of it. I could not hear you.
Sir, how much have we as a nation progressed when it comes to bridging this divide, as the demand for reservation is still ever increasing?
See, this is the problem that we have. I think the demand for reservation is coming because of political reasons. That is why the court has been emphasizing from Indrasani and thereafter in Nagaraj and in subsequent judgments that you need to have a commission to look into data and then determine this. Now, we are not willing to have a caste-based census. So therefore, we are relying on a caste-based census which was taken several decades ago. What is the extent to which different castes which today are recognized as backward class have progressed is not meaningfully being assessed. The Commission for Backward Classes, which has been set up again to determine whether there need to be subdivisions, etc., they are making various recommendations. Now, I can say from my experience in some states that those who have been recognized as backward classes today are occupying. In fact, there was a Satyanathan committee which was constituted by Tamil Nadu government way back in the 1970s and 80s, which went into this and said that certain communities who are treated as backward are today getting the maximum admission in medical college, and they are the doctors on the Ponamali High Road, which is the premium area for the doctors in Madras city. Therefore, this was, I'm talking about 1970, and this has only increased in most of the states. It is indisputable that certain communities have cornered the benefit, but there are a number of other communities. Therefore, we need to weed them out, those who have cornered the benefit, and exclude them from the reservation. And then now, this is a very sensitive political issue. The vote banks representing these communities, they are fairly sizable. And that is why you find that a community which constitutes about 12% in Tamil Nadu, just before the announcement of the election on the same day on which the Election Commission was announcing the date, a reservation was created for 10%. You have the reservation for Marathas, and people are pointing out chapter and verse about how many chief ministers and ministers have come from that community. This is what is happening. Therefore, the politically strong communities have been able to retain these benefits for themselves, and the others have been deprived of it. This is an aspect which needs to be sorted out, and that is where the political powers will have to step in, because the court's powers in this regard may be limited. You can give a direction, okay, constitute commission, weed them out, etc. But the actual implementation has to take place at the instance of the central government and state government.
Thank you, sir. We have Aishwarya Garola taking next question.
Good evening, sir. I'm Aishwarya Garola, and I would like to ask, is collegium system not an impediment to the meritocracy?
Well, let me say that I am not a very strong advocate of collegium system. When the judgment came 3 decades ago, we were all quite exuberant. We thought that the discretion vested in the executive is now being taken away, and the judges will be very, very merit conscious. Unfortunately, that system has been a closed club of a few people, and you have, therefore, you have effectively 11-12 lakh lawyers, and even in the high courts, if you count, there will be more than 1 lakh of lawyers in high court and Supreme Court. But their vision is focused more on persons who are from their chamber, from their family, from persons from their community, from their village or town or city. Now, therefore, you don't have a broad spectrum vision of people, and the selection, therefore, only and exclusively on merit. But I must say that when you talk of merit, I mean not merely success as a lawyer in terms of financial success, but that is why the court laid down, even in regard to designation of advocates, that look at the contribution that he has made in terms of public interest litigation or writing articles. Today you have a court which has not had a single person from academic field, even though the Constitution provides for it. And I would have thought that the collegium would first pick out a person from the law faculty who is an outstanding academic, who is an outstanding jurist, and then get him appointed directly to the Supreme Court. Has not happened. It's a signal failure of the collegium system. I think there have been exceptions. I must say there have been exceptions, but by and large, it has not been a very satisfactory system.
Thank you, sir. I think collegium system is one such thing where it is impediment to meritocracy and democracy both together.
It's perpetuating some kind of things which are not desirable.
Yes, sir. So Farooq has next question. Sir. Farooq.
Yes. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, I would like to ask a question that there have been a constant criticism on a caste-based reservation. As a matter of equal opportunity, is it still needed? And also, what could be the better way of providing reservation in the current scenario of India?
I think we have now reached a stage when I think from the determination of backward class based on caste, we can move into the economic criteria, because 70 years is quite a long time for a republic. And we have whatever were the certain handicaps for the caste which constitute today the backward class. I think by and large we have been able to get over, or in this generation we'll get over, though that may not be so in respect of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. So the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes will have to remain based on the caste identification. But in respect of backward class, I think we have reached a stage where I think we should be able to go more based on the economic criteria.
Thank you, sir. Shubhangi has next question. Last few questions. Shubhangi.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, have you ever encountered a situation where you had to choose one over the other between meritocracy and equal opportunity and regretted your decision later on? And if yes, has that experience of yours changed the preference order?
I personally, don't think I have faced that kind of a situation, because by and large, I think I have allowed also not just the head but also the heart to have a role in making decisions of this kind. Therefore, I have, because it's a combination of the two. But if you have compassion, if you have humanitarian consideration, then it is highly unlikely it will fail. See, I must tell you, I come from a privileged background in the sense that I am born a Brahmin, in that caste. But I come from a not so privileged background because my parents were not that affluent. Therefore, I had to go. I remember the days when I have gone to the school without even a footwear, and therefore those are things which it trains you, and you have seen the hardships. So that is always at the back of your mind when you see it. But I must tell you, if I am today occupying this position, it is because of the education that I got, and thanks to people who have not had education. Kamraj, who was only in third class pass or fourth class pass, he saw what was happening, why the children were not going to the school, and therefore he started this midday meal scheme. Now, free education. There was, when I was studying in school, there was free education right up to school leaving, SSLC. And thereafter, of course, it has come even for college. And the midday meal scheme that Kamraj introduced, followed up by MGR and others, both these people, they come from backgrounds which, both in respect of caste and in respect of economic background, they were in very poor circumstances. Therefore, they had seen the hardships of life. And that is the kind of leadership which is able to recognize the crying needs of those people and is able to provide it.
Thank you, sir. Adarsh Kumar, next question, sir. Adarsh Kumar.
Good evening, sir. So, sir, I had a question that when we read the Article 16 clause 1 of the Constitution and the Article 16 clause 4 of the Constitution, there seems to be an inherent contradiction, which on one hand offers equality for all, and on the other hand offers reservation for jobs on the backward classes. So, how do you perceive this in light of meritocracy and the equality of opportunity as being the parameters?
No, therefore, that is the essential question that we have been discussing. When we talk of equality amongst people who are essentially unequal, so therefore, how can you have a uniform yardstick of saying that, okay, we will now have a joint entrance examination and take the marks in that, and then apply uniformly to all without providing some kind of a handicap to people who come from backgrounds which are not so helpful for them having a level playing field in terms of competing on merit. Therefore, that's a question. That is why the court said that 16.4 is not an exception. 16.4 is to enable the equal opportunity, is part of the very main concept of equality. It is to provide, it is to equalize. The equality will have to be in equal results. It has to result in that. That's the question.
Thank you, sir. We have one last question from the audience, sir. Charvi will be coming up. Charvi.
Good evening, sir.
Good.
Sir, as you've been the counsel of Ram Lalla, so I'm compelled to ask this question. Sir, Justice Ramlala Virajman has been upheld as the juristic person. Can't Lord Ayappa be held as one too, to ensure that women of menstrual age are not allowed near him, as he is a celibate? And why is it essential to bring in the concept of women equality in a spiritual sphere, keeping in mind that Lord Ayappa is a Naishtik Brahmachari?
See, this is a question which has to be argued before the 9 judges, which I will certainly be arguing that. See, I think the court in Sabarimala case, to some extent, did not give enough importance to the distinction in the language used in Article 15 and Article 25. That was the problem, and which we intend highlighting. When Article 15 talks of access to places, shops, public restaurants, hotels, and places of public entertainment, etc., use of wells, tanks, bathing guards, roads, and places of public resort maintained wholly or partly. Now, why did 15.2, when it talks of no citizen shall on ground of only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them? Now, number one, this doesn't talk of temples, etc. That is separately dealt with in Article 25. And the kind of, in regard to access here, what is provided, all persons are equally entitled to freedom of conscience, then various other things. Now, you do not, therefore, providing for social welfare and reform or the throwing open of Hindu religious institutions of public character to all classes and sections of Hindus. Now, the gender-based discrimination, if it is traceable to some essential religious practices, then I would certainly think it is a matter which requires consideration, and there should have been sufficient attention focused on the distinction in the language used in 15 and 16, compare it with Article 25, 26, and even in regard to the Article 29, which talks of access to the institutions of the minorities. Now, therefore, I think these are aspects which will be highlighted and argued in the 9-judge bench, and hopefully the 9-judge bench will perhaps recognize the dissenting view of Justice Indu Malhotra to be the correct view. We are hoping for that.
Thank you, sir. So one last question from our end. We are the third year, final year students coming out in a matter of few months joining the bar. Do you have any few advices to give us, sir?
Sorry?
So we are the final year students, sir. Most of us, my colleagues, are final year students.
Yeah.
And in a matter of few months, we are going to join the bar.
Yeah.
Do you have any words of advice for aspiring lawyers, litigators?
I think, see, there is a huge paradigm shift in the legal profession which is taking place. And I think all of you need to keep that in mind, because it is not merely in regard to the procedure or the physical and virtual court and various other things. But I think there is a greater consciousness in regard to reaching justice to the consumers of justice much faster. I think this kind of, see, as lawyers, we are here essentially to serve the consumers of justice. That consciousness, I think, needs to sink in more and more amongst the lawyers and the law students. I think, therefore, how to, avoid delaying the proceedings and quickening the pace of reaching justice is the significant thing. Otherwise, we as a profession would have failed. I think that's the most important thing that you need to keep in mind, whether you are going to be a practicing lawyer or you are going to be in corporate practice, because ultimately you look for what is this for? This is, at the end of the day, we are enablers in resolution of disputes between parties. Therefore, I think alternate dispute resolution, mediation, more than arbitration, I think is an area where a substantial input will have to go in.
So, do you have any favorite remarkable courtroom experience in your illustrious career?
Do I have any?
Any remarkable courtroom experience?
I have, I think we have had some of the best times soon after the emergency, after the election. I think the kind of the freedom that was there, which was filling the air in the nation and in every walk of life, including judiciary. I think that that was something which we need to get back. That is what we are all earning for. That kind of freedom spirit, the desire of the court to enlarge the liberties, to ensure that the citizens get that kind of right, I think is most important. And I remember the days when in a habeas corpus petition, notice is a matter of course, next day the matter will be taken up for final hearing. We need to get back those days. Habeas corpus cannot wait for months.
Yes. Yes. Thank you so much, sir. It's been absolute privilege moderating this Q&A session, sir. We hope to host you soon again. And now I request Dr. Seema Singh to deliver a vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. It was truly a very insightful lecture, and this topic is very close to my heart because I have rarely seen people discussing this topic because they consider it as a very sensitive and a very political issue. But I believe that it is a very relevant topic, and it's high time to discuss this equal opportunity and meritocracy. And I just want to share a few of my ideas because I told you that this is also very close to my heart, and because there are many students and viewers also. Perhaps I think there is a confusion between equality and equal opportunity, and equality is a largely misunderstood term. If we go back in the pre-independent India, as you very rightly said that till Industrial Revolution, India never seen a problem of unemployment. And if we go and check about what has been written about the Indian economic history by Will Durand and Angus Madison, they accepted that by the year 1498, India was contributing 33% in the global economy. So what suddenly happened that we are not able to create opportunity? Now the problem is most of the students, most of the youth, they are dependent upon the government job. And what I personally believe, sir, because we could not provide, this is the biggest mistake which I believe that we made in independent India. And the mistake it is, we could not ensure free and quality education to all. And that was the responsibility of the state. So to cover up their, their failure, they have evolved so many theories, and by the passage of time, it seems that now reservation has completely politicized issue, and a protective discrimination is going to be converted into a reverse discrimination. And caste identity, now I believe that because of this caste-based reservation, this caste identity has become permanent. So as Ravi has asked that how we will attain the basic philosophy of our constitution, which talks about the fraternity. So it's high time to relook over this sensitive issue, and it is very much important to review the reservation policy. And I am very much agree with what you suggested at end, sir, that earlier we were educationally backward, and thus we were educationally and socially backward. But now the time has been changed. Most of the people are educationally backward because they are economically backward. So I think it's high time to change or to include this economic backwardness in Article 15 and 16 also. With this, sir, I am extremely thankful to you, sir. It was a great learning experience for all of us. And on the behalf of entire Campus Law Center, on the behalf of my professor in charge, Professor Raman Mittal in his absentia, on the behalf of my students of DDS committee, especially Vijay and Kajal, I extend my big thanks to you, sir, and we hope that very soon we will invite you for some other lecture, and we will be benefited for your excellent experience, which is definitely going to be a very learning experience for all the students and for all the viewers. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.